All right, man. Welcome to the podcast. You know,
Appreciate you having me on.
no problem. We're going to talk about the food dyes today. We were already talking a little bit about RFK, and I think kind of the reason, like we were talking, not just the fact that he's linked with Trump, but I think his last name also is what gives him a little bit more, if you want to call it clout or
Yeah,
recognition.
right.
Uh, I don't know if you've listened to some of my other stuff. I have a 6-year old that he has autism.
hmm
Very, I don't know if you want to call it limited, whatever you would like to call it. It's middle. He struggled like learning to speak. He's getting there. And do I think he has autism? Yeah, I'm kind of in the camp with RFK. I think a lot of people misunderstand RFK when he says that food dyes can be linked to autism or that vaccines can, right? And I think that's because he's questioning it. And I think that sometimes correlation matters just as much as facts.
It certainly can. So, like we were talking about, it's so much of it, I feel, is because of who he's associated with. And then when you combine who he's aligned with, I don't think you would have got this type of pushback when it was, 4 years ago, let's say.
No,
Um,
definitely not.
but I think also when something comes on the heels of what we went through, we're, just past the 5 year anniversary of, 2 weeks to flatten the curve. And you had
Yeah.
somebody at a podium saying, hey, you know, this is, this is how we're going to fix this. And then we've seen the downfall of that. We've seen the impacts of it, some good, some bad, some kind of indifferent. And so I think anytime you get someone who's, coming out and saying, we're gonna I think the last thing was by September they're going to be able to have some type of answers about what's driving up the rates of autism by September. I think is kind of what their new goal is, and I think that's I think it's an admirable goal to have. But at
Doesn't
the
seem
same,
realistic though.
it doesn't, and I think that when you're if you want to say, hey, this is what my goal is, I want to try to figure this out. And by September, I'm going to have a team of epidemiologists. I'm going to have a team of whomever your collection of doctors, and we're going to sit together, whether it's in the House, whether it's in the Senate, and they're going to pull people together and say, okay, hey, who are some doctors that you would recommend? And we want to sit down and we actually want to break down the literature on everything, and we're
Right.
going to have a team. And then starting in September, I'm not saying it should be you drag this thing out forever, but have a team ready to go in September, because like I feel that saying we're going to have the reason that rates of autism are so high in the next 4 months, 5 months, that's like saying we're going to have a cure for cancer by 2026. When the ball drops,
Right.
we're going to announce the cure to cancer forever. It's never going to be a thing anymore. Like, here, let's let's kind of start a little bit more realistic. And I understand, like, even the administration has a as very their goals are very, very broad, very large. They want to do a million things in the first 100 days, and they've only got a short amount of time to do things. And I don't know if it's just this sense of urgency, like, hey, I don't have as big a personality, but because of who I'm aligned with right now in this administration, I've got to create some huge, lofty, crazy goal. It's like, I want them to succeed. I would like for there to be more answers available. I would like for people to be better informed rather than just, I mean, I know this is a podcast, but much rather have more information available and sources readily available rather than everyone
Oh yeah.
having to turn to podcasts to
Oh
get
yeah.
their health and what, like, this in this whole wellness community. And I just think that we're kind of I think he's setting himself up, and I think he's setting a lot of people up for failure, unfortunately.
No, for sure. And I don't think he is intentionally, which I don't think you do. I don't think
No,
that you think
no,
he is either.
no.
Something that one of my bosses at work had kind of introduced me to, and it's something that I guess I never really paid attention to. You know, we both grew up in the 90s, right? Early 2000s, 90s. So, you
Yep.
know, life was a tad bit more simple. But, you
A
know,
lot.
back then, right. You know, but back then, the ironic thing is, did you know a lot of the tobacco companies owned the food processing companies back then? Not
Hmm.
as many now, right? But
Right.
what were the tobacco companies specialized in?
Hmm.
Addiction.
Hmm.
They were specialized in addiction, and a lot of the things that, like, you know, I've said a couple of my posts, you know, hey, Mountain Dew, I got addicted to it. You know, there was at one point, you know, I could drink a 12 pack of Mountain Dew in a day, get up next morning, and I would have to go to the doctor for whatever, you know, and he would do, you know, he'd be like, oh,
Hmm.
you know, we got to test your blood sugar. And he'd be like, did you fast the night before? I was like, no, I was had a pop on boy here this morning, you know, and he's like,
Right.
your blood sugar is perfectly normal,
Yep.
you know, but I'm the exception to that rule in that aspect, you know, outside of my weight, it hasn't really hurt me,
Hmm.
you know, like, you know, it's, but I don't think that that part of it is talked about enough, you know, like when it comes to these dyes and things like that, you know, it's like, gambling, like how they design casinos, right? They design the flashing lights and the colors to make
Yep.
you want to do more, right?
Yep.
Same thing with the dyes. It's to get you to want it. It's that's what it's about, and
It
it's sad that it is that way.
it is, and this is where I feel like he's missing the mark, and I feel like they're missing the moment because so much of it goes back to personal accountability, personal
Yes,
responsibility, and you know we can grandstand or he can grandstand or anyone. And again, I'm not opposed to necessarily the things that he's doing, but I think we're also in a society where people are searching for answers and they're looking also for the quick fix.
yes,
And I feel like we're going to fall short because what's going to happen is, you know, the FDA, and they did their announcement on the 6 or 7, you know, food dyes, the synthetic food dyes that are going to be a no go anymore by 2026. Okay. But then when you don't get the results that you're claiming that you're going to get, what's going to happen now? Because
right.
we just had 4 or 5 years of somebody saying if you wear a mask, if you follow arrows in a grocery store, if you get a shot, if you get a second shot, if you get a third shot, if you get your seventh, if you get your eighth, it's not going to happen. And if it is, it's because the people that didn't. Well, I know it's a totally different, you know, kind of avenue that we're going down. But what's going to happen is all the people that were saying you're crazy and I can't believe that, you know, you're making me feel bad because my kid is, you know, has autism or might be on the spectrum, and you know these people that are getting so defensive, they're just going to have that ammunition because again we're
Yes,
missing the mark, and it's that personal accountability, that personal responsibility, because yes, as it pertains to synthetic food dyes, there are no excuse me, there are no nutritional benefits to it,
no,
but it's not that, like, it's not the dye that's doing the damage.
I think
That's
it's the
just the
amount of it.
it's not even that, because when you look at, so to try to not bore people, when you look at what the food dyes and everything, what they're in, they're in very highly processed food. And the
Yep.
problem with highly processed food is that it's more calorically dense. And when it's more calorically dense, it's easier to overeat and overconsume. And that's
Yes.
why I feel like we're missing the mark, because we're saying this is causing this, but it's not. It sounds good because, again, in today's society, we're always looking to be able to say, hey, that's it. Hey, that's it. We're always looking for the boogeyman. And it's like, no, all you got to do, there's not a ghost under your bed. It's
No,
you've got to you
it's
just got
funny
to
that you
vacuum
say
underneath
boogeyman.
it.
I don't know if you ever listened to Ramstein. I'm a
Mhm.
I love their music, but a song they have, I'm drawing a blink on it now, but it's essentially about the boogeyman. It's God, what is it? It's it just came out in their last album, but it essentially says, you know, don't be afraid of the boogeyman, you know, and
Mhm.
things like that. But it essentially, like, kind of what you're talking about is they go after that, you know. Um,
They do, and a lot of it too is because of the evolution. You know, kind of like how the administration taught. Well, not necessarily the administration, but the White House press secretary, how she talks about expanding the press room and getting, because people are going for something a little bit more mainstream, they're tuning into different outlets for their news sources. And the problem is when the pendulum swings one way, if it goes too extreme, when it swings back the other way, it's going to be even more extreme.
Yes,
And I think that
and that's what's happened.
there's so much pent up frustration, to put it mildly, about what happened with COVID. And rather than them coming out and saying, I don't know, like, we don't have this information because we haven't experienced this before. And so when they were making these bold statements of, if you do this, if you do this, if you do this, and so then you had this super extreme view of you can only do these certain things. And again, when you get the pendulum to swing to the other way, it's like, guys, it's not over here and it's not over here. It's right here. And not to keep tying it back into COVID, but one of the big things was, making sure you're exercising properly, or not properly, but making sure you're getting adequate exercising. Your nutrition, making sure your nutrition is relatively well. And it's like the same things that were likely going to help you overcome COVID if you were dealt that blow are a lot of the same things that are going to help alleviate a lot of these diseases and a lot of the chronic health issues and the chronic health crisis that they're targeting. And it's like, I just feel
Yes.
like they're not bull in a china shop, but they're just saying that. And it's like, no, it's not that. It's you, it's
Right.
us.
No, and part of what I think, like, I tell a lot of people, did I vote for the current president? Yes, I voted for him in six, or actually, I didn't vote for him the first time around, but I supported him when he got in, and as he did more stuff, I was more of a Gary Johnson fan at the time.
Okay.
A little bit more limited government, but
Hmm.
Gary Johnson was a little bit more of a bigger government than most libertarians would go for.
Right.
um, I have seen seemingly since then gone more towards the center. Right, as you get older, they say you get wiser, you see things differently.
Right.
And but the one thing that is Trump and RFK, they're dismantling the current system, is what they're doing.
Right.
And the problem is they don't seem to have a plan to replace it. Because it's easy to dismantle the system, but I think the next president's task is going to be is what do they do to replace it? Because I think that's what's
Exactly.
happening now is our current establishments that have been around for our whole lives. Growing up, if you know
Yep.
90s, even now, go to the grocery store, see FDA approved, boom, good, right? But now we
Yep.
learn now is that they put things, carbon dioxide, whatever it is, into the red meats to make them brighter, to make them more appealable to you. And while there's no direct link to that being bad for you necessarily,
Hmm.
you can't tell me that that's like great for you when you consume that every day, all the time.
Right. And there's, like I said, like, when you break down everything, when they say something may cause, and again, depending upon how far down the scientific rabbit hole you really want to go, um, when something may cause something, I mean, we're talking, it's a point, it's from a 0.01 all the way up to 100,
Oh yeah.
you know? So anything may cause and may cause. And I'm a huge supporter of the idea of, listen, if we can at least make people more aware, then I'm all for it. I'm all for it. And I think that when we're tackling the chronic health issue that is this "Make America Healthy Again" slogan that they've been throwing around, it's like, okay, then we need to lay out the facts. And what are the facts? The facts are that the typical U.S. diet is just over 3,900 calories per day.
Ooh.
3,900 calories per day. So the most recent data that we have is average is 3,918 calories per day. 3,500 calories is a pound. To compound that and make it even worse, the average US exercise rate is less than 20 minutes per day.
I can confirm
So, so it's like, like, if we're not talking about that, it's like, you can, if you that's why, like I said, I just think that we're missing the mark on it, because we're not talking about, you know, hey, get out and go for a walk more. We're not saying everybody
Yeah.
needs to be at the gym, 3 hours a day. But again, our calories are up here, our activity level is down here. And it's like, when you want to talk about, I don't know if I'd say necessarily just because it's been the big thing that he's talked about is autism. Um, and we're looking at food dyes, and we're looking at possible vaccinations and things like that. It's like, okay, well, what has also changed in that time? Kids, every time I drive through like my old childhood neighborhood that I grew up in, the basketball courts have all been taken down. The concrete's
Boy,
all been
that
busted.
or they're so run down.
The tennis courts are down. There's no more parks. There's no more swings. In every kid, I mean, it doesn't matter where you go. If you go to a supermarket, grocery store, if you go, if you just go to a typical run at Meyer, or wherever it is, if you're in the mall, if you go to a concert, if you go to a sporting event, it doesn't matter how old the kid is. The kid always has a phone in their hand, and if
Mhm.
they're out in public with the phone in their hand, it's like, so then what are you doing when you're at home? So clearly you're not. I mean, I live kitty corner from an elementary school. I never see the kids outside playing. I never see kids down the street playing. They're not out riding their bike, or rollerblading, or they don't have. I'm not saying everybody has to have like a swing set or anything, but they're not out there doing anything. So if they're not doing anything when they're going to be the most active, when they have all of the energy, what makes you think they're going to do it when they're when they're knee deep in corporate America, and trying to work 70, 80 hours to provide things now for their kids? I mean, it's just going to continue to get worse and worse and worse.
Oh yeah, something weird that I noticed with my 6-year-old and even a little bit my 15-year-old, but as he became more 15, he's really big into music, and I built him an 18-foot by 20-foot bedroom in the basement, and then he's
Nice.
also got like his own little studio. I mean, it's essentially the size of most people's living room, right?
Right.
But he pretty much owns the basement. Outside of for owning the basement, he has to do the laundry. That's kind of like the
The
exchange
trade
pay.
off.
My 6-year-old, he has this is gonna sound crazy, and people are, but he has a PlayStation 4, a Nintendo Switch, he has an Xbox Series S, he has tablets, a phone. But you know what? Like when he noticed the weather was nice today, you know what he said? Threw on his shoes and said, "Deuces, I'm going in the backyard with the dogs."
Nice.
And he
Nice.
does that automatic. I don't even have to push him. And
Such a
what
great
we
thing.
did is when he turned 6, we got he calls it a tractor, but essentially like a 4-wheeler, um power wheels type of thing, right?
Gotcha.
And he just drives it around the backyards, and we
Mhm.
got our puppies chase him, right? And and he gets on those things so he can easily unplug and
Mhm.
accomplish something.
Right.
He's technically autistic, but he's in general education.
Mhm.
Last week, we've kind of switched his diet up a little bit. But last week he was in school, and he did a whole math thing, all his math homework and everything, with nobody's help. And now, but this is also the same kid. If you said, "Hey, do that sheet of work," he would look at you and go, "No,"
I'm like,
and
I'm
just
good.
won't do it. He'll put his head down, go to sleep, or he'll do it
Right.
just because you told him to.
Right.
So I think part of it is with like growing up, where I think we had the advantage compared to today's kids is we grew up in a world where there was video games, right? But we also had the arcade, which you either your parents dropped you off to, and
Mhm.
even if they did drop you off, you had to walk around the mall, you had to walk around the arcade, you're standing up, you really weren't sitting, you're
Yep.
moving around, boom, boom, boom. So you're wearing off a lot of these things
Oh
that would
yeah.
normally be there. And I feel like that is missing, and that's why so these kids go to like Mountain Dew now. I feel like Mountain Dew's like pretty much if new Call of Duty comes out, Mountain Dew's on it. And
Yep.
that's like one of the biggest games every year. Even though, gosh, I haven't been interested in it so long.
Right.
Uh, and so these kids sit there and they consume massive amounts of Mountain Dew. I got addicted to Mountain Dew at a young age. I'd say probably 6 years old. My god uncle used to own. I don't know if it's still there or not, but it used to be a Dunkin' Donuts on Haggerty and 9 Mile, and it was in like a little strip mall with like there
I
was a
think it.
party
I
store
think it is.
there.
I think, yeah, it's still there. Yeah.
Yeah, he sold it, but but back then, the Dunkin' Donuts used to have fountain in it, right?
Hmm.
So we would go up there sometimes, and my dad would be like, my uncle would be like, he'd be like, hey, here's a cup, get all the pop you want. But back then they didn't really talk about how that's just bad for us. And the reason why I bring that up is, RFK went after, I think it was red dye number 3 or 4. I can't remember which one it is that was banned in cosmetics in 1990 because
That's yeah, Red Die 3. It's been
yeah,
out.
yeah,
Yeah, it's been out of. It's been out of
cosmetics
most
since the
products.
90s.
Yeah. Yep.
And what kills me is so it's not good for your skin,
Mhm.
but your skin is essentially your biggest organ, right? But you're telling me I can't have it on my skin, but I can consume it. That just, to me, it's like,
There,
okay, yeah, there's no scientific proof, right?
it's you can so that's one of those, like, if you look at it just at face value, absolutely. But then I mean, to be fair and not really to play devil's advocate, but I mean, if I spill bleach on my hands, it's one
Mm-hmm.
thing, and we all know what happened when you know
Tide
when Trump
Pods.
didn't say to drink bleach, but if
Oh
you
yeah.
drink bleach, it has a much different effect. And I mean, again, I know that's a little bit more extreme than
Oh yeah.
you know
No, no, I
than a
totally get
than
that.
a dye that's used in cosmetics. Um, so a company's goal, as we all know, a business's goal is to make money.
Right.
Period. If we stop purchasing the products that are being distributed by them, then they're going to change. That's It's true in sports. You stop going to the games, empty stadiums, we're going to change the product. We're going to
Mm-hmm.
put on we're going to do at the movie theater, we're going to do these movies. We're not, nobody's buying the horror movie tickets. So then what do? We change it to animated movies or, whatever it is.
Yep.
So if you stop putting these products out there for people to buy, you're not going to make money. Well, when people stop buying them, you're going to have to change. And again, I don't think that I think we've become a little too convoluted in the idea that, well, it might not be bad, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's good. Fair. Um, but I think we're, whatever the adage is, trying to look past the trees to see through the forest, or whatever it
Oh
is.
yeah.
And like I said, if we go back to, it's different consuming soda when you're 8 years old and you're going to hop on your bike to
Yep.
ride from 7-Eleven up to a buddy's house, and then you guys are going to hang out, you know, like those of us who grew up in that time, for most of the country anyway, in summer, the sun came out, you went outside, and you came back home once to eat, and you needed to make sure that you were within, shouting distance when the streetlights came on.
Yep.
So you're burning through everything because we walked everywhere, we rode our bikes, we, rollerblades, skateboards, scooters, whatever it was, we did all of that. So a lot of the calories that weren't necessarily super nutritious for us, and the things that had some of these, additives or these sweeteners or whatever, it didn't really matter because we were consuming it, but we were burning it off in the process to getting there. We were burning the calories to go to the store to buy the Mountain Dew, and then as we get older, we start driving, and that's
Yeah.
so when you get one of the big comparisons that you often hear is, well, why does the U.S. version have all of these, and then why does the Europe version? Everybody walks everywhere else except for here.
Yeah. Europe, the whole society is designed for you walking.
Mm-hmm.
In America, as much as has been to our benefit economically and standard of living, right? That we've been,
Right.
that the automation in the cars, and it's also been to the detriment of the natural human. Whereas in Europe, they took a mixed bag approach.
Mm-hmm.
Something that my wife actually told me, like I've been looking into dyes and stuff, and yeah, I'm sure you got me on Facebook. See, I'm real big about the German stuff, right? Because well, I don't advocate everything that they do. I
Mm-hmm.
think that America, Germans are, I think, of German heritage, are the biggest European descendants next to Irish and British. Um, but the Germans do things like, so bread is as part of much as their daily diet over there, but they use I think it's the wheat based flour. rather than bleached, processed flour that we do. But it's as common as like drinking water there. And what we
Right.
call bread, they look as like sweet bread. And I don't even think they generally eat that kind of bread. One day I was just really curious. I ordered some I think it was pumpernickel sandwich bread from Germany.
Okay.
And it didn't have no dyes, and their packaging, I don't know if you've ever seen European packaging, it'll have like an A through, I think like it's E or something like that graded for how, if it's a packaged pre-made food. So they grade it how it may affect you, healthy for you, however they word it. And I think it was like a C or a B. And it tasted so different than any pumpernickel I've ever had in the United States.
Hmm.
It was definitely a lot more, not as flexible, like
Hmm.
when I bit into the sandwich, like it like broke a little bit, and
Yep.
I'm just sitting here and I'm like, man, how do Europeans eat sandwiches? And then you look at it and their sandwiches, when they eat them, they're more like pockets
Yep.
than they are sandwiches like how we do it. Unless you get like a schnitzel sandwich, which is just like a gargantuan sized piece of pork between a
Right.
bun. But they so going back to that though, Aldi's they use in a lot of their red foods because a lot of the dyes that he's going after, Aldi's already is doesn't allow in their products
Yeah.
that you
Yep.
sell in their
And,
stores.
hmm.
Some of them they'll give like passes, I think, to like Coca Cola and that because it's like American, like I don't know, however they want to word it, but Aldi's is a German company. That's where they're based at, and they were invented, born, whatever you want to call it. But what they do is they use like fruits, vegetables, things of that nature, different items, and I don't know how the process works for it. Obviously it's got to be processed to create a dye, but they go after
Right.
dyes based on that, and and RFK talks about like the autism and where and one person commented on my one of my TikToks um, that how they measure autism over there is different than how they measure it here, right? It's their standards are a lot narrower, and where I think that's I don't know if you want to call it bad thing, good thing, um, is I think too often here we if you don't fit inside the box we call you autistic, and that was like I don't know if you ever seen one of my things where I talked about that is and my God, it led to me and my wife like almost going to the point where I almost like said, you know what, I can raise my son separate from you. Like it didn't get that far, right? But it was just like
Right.
that feeling of like you felt isolated because when
Absolutely.
I'm sitting there, the forum goes from ages 4 to 12 or whatever it was, and I'm going. I was like, well, it's just an in general. What if the 12-year-old hasn't been touted for it? I said, I get that. Then give him the 4-year-old test. But I said, how can in any way can you give any credibility to a test for autism that tests the same one for a 4-year-old as it does a 12-year-old?
Right.
You're creating such a broad spectrum, and
Absolutely.
and one of the things I've seen is they call a tick chewing on pen caps. Man, I remember in high school, I did that when I was reading. Like, and I'm sitting here looking at some of these ticks, and I'm going, "Well, man, like every single person I've ever known in my life is considered autistic at this point."
Yep.
And I think they kind of take that and they run with it. And then I was talking to my family doctor about it. I've been with my family doctor, God, I think 20 years. I've had him right around there, and he's been with me through it all. I'm still 350 pounds, but I'm down from I was over 500.
Hmm. And that's huge,
And
man.
yeah, and the problem is
In a
that
good
I've
way.
yeah, oh yeah, no, no, no.
Definitely.
I listen. I'll get offended by it. The problem is that like I tell people like and I'm not linking it to drugs or anything, but I tell people some people smoke crack. I have Mountain Dew.
Hmm.
Like there's been times where like I'm so stressed out, right? Just or like anything like just I guess anything that would like want you to be like like people who would smoke a cigarette or you go for a drink or
Hmm.
that thing, right? That your addictive mindset goes to. That
Yep.
was it,
Hmm.
because if anybody who's drink pop or whatever, when you get that first like drink when you haven't had in a long time, your eyes water
Yep.
when it's like super cold and crisp, and you get that dopamine rush, right? And you're like, oh my God.
Right.
And what I think like talking like about what you're saying is like the activity, right? Like we had that dopamine rush of getting on our bikes. Hey man, let's go. God, what was
Yep.
it that was at Westland Mall? It was like the American Fun Center or something like that was the
Hmm.
arcade. It was something, it was
Yep.
right by Funkoland that used to be around back
Yep.
then.
Yep.
That theater was called, I think, the Quad Vadis. Was that how you said it?
Yeah,
Quad.
Quo Vadis. Yeah, Quo
Yeah.
Vadis across the street. Yep.
Yeah. I seen the
Yep.
first Wayne's World there with my dad, and I remember people going, "Your dad took you to see that?" I'm like, "My dad took me to see everything." You know, my dad was like, "I'm not going to isolate you from this." You
Right.
know, and then I look at my kid, and I'm sitting there, and he repeats something, and I'm going, "My God, my dad would have killed me if I said that." And you know, my dad's taking me to like see Wayne's World, and you know, my God, I was watching. What were those movies that Chuck Norris did, where he busted the cocaine guys in the '90s or late '80s, '90s? Oh God, I forget the
I
name
know.
of it, but you know,
I can picture them because I can picture like the covers
yeah, the
and
guy
things
had
like
like the
that.
ponytail, was like the bad guy, you know,
Yep.
and it was just, but it was like back then. I don't. It's weird because back then we process things differently, right? Like
Hmm.
somehow, like, and don't get me wrong, there's a lot of instances where kids did it. They did stupid things. You know, like when Mortal Kombat came out, there's some, for whatever reason, some parents that were not able to get through their kids that you cannot rip somebody's heart out or, you know, rip their throat off. Like I'm sure that happens somewhere, right? But the vast majority of us, like, I don't know if it was just because of how we were brought up. It's to me, it's really hard to really like put your thumb on it, right? Because there's just so many factors.
I think and I know it can be a touchy subject for a lot of people. And this isn't, like I tell people, God didn't put me on this earth to judge anybody. That's not my role. But I think a lot of it is we we went through a shift where the parents stopped raising, and it was everything and everyone else that was doing it.
Yes.
I think that has contributed most to it, because I think, like, when you look at it and you look at kind of even like the society, culture, and even economically, like that post 80s, and women were obviously working and involved, but it wasn't like two income households for everything. Like,
No, there.
usually,
Yeah.
usually, you know, depending upon what your situation was, you typically, you know, to paint very broadly, it was usually dad went to work, mom stayed home, and then if mom was working, mom was only working typically in the hours that the kids were in school. Generally speaking, not always the case. Everyone is, so I'm not saying that applies to everyone, but then we went through this shift, and a massive economic shift throughout the 90s, late 80s through the 90s into the 2000s. And when technology really started to take off, and it became dad's at work, mom's not working from 9 to 3 anymore, or 9 to 2 anymore. Mom's working a full-time job now too. Dad's coming home at 7 o'clock. Mom's going to work at 6 o'clock, and it's babysitter for. So then it became, everyone was like, mom was gone, dad was gone, and then it was like babysitter who's 2 years older than the kid, and then it became, oh, here's this device, oh, here's this device. And so you know they were unintended consequences, but it was so much of, like, mom and dad aren't home, and it's like
Yeah.
you've got to get that attention from somewhere. So if you're not able to be out playing with friends, unless it was summertime for the most part, because like it even is now in the wintertime, it's dark at 4 o'clock, so you get home from school and it's like, what am I going to do? Well, I can't get in my car and drive because I'm 12 years old.
Right.
So here's the tablet, here's the access code for Netflix, for Apple TV, for Prime, whatever it is. And like I said, so unintended consequences, but everyone was being raised by everyone seemingly but their parents. And I
Yes.
think that has played into it so much, because I don't.
You know,
Go
it,
ahead.
parents weren't really educated on a lot of these things. You know, like I know my dad really wasn't. You know, my dad was just because my dad was a single dad. You know, and my dad was just kind of one of those. You know, and God rest his soul, but in my dad's world, it was, don't make me have to get pissed off at you. I don't want to be pissed off at you. I love you. I'll buy you anything you want.
Mm-hmm.
But if you make my day poop, I'm gonna make your life poop.
Right.
Like that's just how it went. Like it, like I love you wasn't something I heard very often. Like when my dad said that, I could probably count on two hands the amount of times I ever heard it from my father. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I just knew that he did, right? but I don't think that they really educated parents on this. Like, like I don't ever remember growing up hearing about the red dye being banned in cosmetics. Like I had aunts, my aunts, my cousin, my grandma all lived like a mile up the road. So it's not like I didn't have any female influence in my life.
Right.
I had my stepmom, but they never talked about those things, right? It was never, hey, man, that caused cancer, but it's in your candy. Nobody ever questioned it. There was no questions, and I think that's kind of like what RFK is bringing to the table is let's start asking questions. Like because sometimes like certain things like they get like they know what causes a lightning strike, right? Like they can tell you, but they can't tell you where it's going to hit.
Right.
But we know that there's a correlation between storms and high grounds and things like
Mhm.
that, right? But we don't know the exact things. Same with earthquakes. We know that certain things correlate when an earthquake can happen, not
Mhm.
happen. So I think that like just through like natural process that there can be a correlation linked to a lot of things that we can't always necessarily prove. Uh, it's just same as if you're a person of faith, right? There's no correlation to to a non-believer that there's God,
Mhm.
but to to that person that like to me, hey, I believe there's a correlation. For instance, yellow dye 5, I'm looking at this thing right here. Where is it at? Yellow dye 5 is in just like I would have not really thought it, but it's in sauces, preserved fruit. I can see it being in certain cheeses, soups, cereals, and more. It's used in candy. Here's a killer one that I don't. This is just crazy to me, and I never thought in my life I would read this. Blue Dye 2, which is Indigo Carmine FDC Blue number 2 or Indigo Time. I guess that's how you pronounce it. It's a royal blue dye commonly found in this. If this blows your mind, it blows my mind. Candy, ice cream, cereal, snacks, which you would expect, right? But this is the one that I didn't. Sausage.
I could see it.
I, I can see it, but I guess I've never looked at a pack of sausage and thought that it
for
had
for
dye in
for
it.
dye
Like,
content.
right. And then, I'm looking right under it, green dye 3, or they call it fast green FCF or FD&C. A forest green dye often found in canned vegetables, cereal, candy, ice cream. Now, I would have never thought the canned vegetables, salad dressing, soft
Mhm.
drinks, and more. They're also, now this is, so what it is to clarify a little bit, because I thought it was a ban too, right? But what essentially he told the food company is, yeah, you have till 2027 to get rid of it, or we're going to completely ban it and forbid it.
Mhm.
So he's essentially saying, hey, get it done yourself.
Right.
I guess I just, just don't trust corporate America to do the right thing, all, positive.
All
But,
right.
here's the FDA will also move to eliminate the use of Citrus Red 2 Solvent Red 80, a dye used only to color the skin of oranges in the United States. Only in the United States do we color the skin of oranges, specifically Florida oranges. It's used to make the skins more vibrant, but is not allowed on the inner edible of the fruit. Now, I get that it's not allowed, right? But you're not allowed to punch someone in the face. But we all thought about it, and it's happened. Um,
You
and,
are.
and,
There's
and
just consequences to it.
right, and here's like another one under it. Orange B. It's a dye used for one purpose: hot dog and sausage casings. The dye itself is no longer made in the U.S., limiting its use even further, but it's still used. These are things that I don't think anybody and their mom would ever look at a lot of these and go, that's not good for me, because I know like anytime I've been, hey, an orange is healthy for you. I've never once had anybody, my doctor, nutritionist that I used to see a couple times, say, hey, an orange, it's got a dye in
It
it.
it's also one of those things, and you touched on it earlier when you're talking about like going to the casino and how they make it. So think about I guess a banana would be the most common one. You grab a banana, you peel the banana, right? Typically, it's people that know the stages of the ripeness, when it goes from the green to the really bright yellow, and then it gets darker. And as it gets darker, that's where all the flavor is, right? But then the brown spots, people freak out about the brown spot.
It's actually better
Like,
for you.
like, all right, people freak out about that and they won't eat it. Well, it's the same logic that's applied. So your, blue, there's nothing naturally blue. Nothing naturally occurs that's blue. Blueberries, those are purple. Like
Oh yeah.
blue is not a natural color. So anything that's going to enhance the appearance, um, it's I guess you'd really have to be able to parse it, but it's the same thing as taking a picture. Like when we all graduated high school, right? And you
Mhm.
took you went and took your pictures or whatever. They airbrushed, they added filters, they did all this, so nobody had their 17-year-old pimple or whatever it was.
Oh yeah.
Everyone's teeth were whiter, skin was a little darker, so on and so. It's You're basically airbrushing the food, and it's not to say that that's necessarily good, but just because it isn't good doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. It's it is all done for profit because it doesn't cost the companies really anything to add it in. It makes something be more appealing. If something's more appealing, more people are going to purchase it. When you like, let's say you brought up sausage. So let's say you go to the store to buy sausage or pepperoni or something like that, right? So you got pepperoni and you see this bright red pepperoni, and then the package behind it, it looks like somebody poked a hole in it, looks like air's gotten to it, and now they're starting to gray a little. You're gonna go, I'm not touching that one. That one looks disgusting. So now we're going to have to retrain and reprogram everything because we're so used to, like, when you go to the store, if you go to a normal grocery store, if you don't go to a butcher, right, and you've got two packages, red meat's typically the most, but if you go like ground turkey, right, so if you go ground turkey, it's got a nice looking pinkish color to it, it's faded pink. But then if you look at the one next to it and that one's gray, you're not going to pick the gray one. You're going to pick the one that's a more appeal to it.
Right.
And that's just
We've always been taught that the brighter
Mhm.
color is the ripe one. Like you were saying,
Right.
like it's
And so now,
growing up that was considered good for you.
and so to kind of like circle way back, I think that if this is something that then leads, and this is where they could indirectly hit the mark that they're trying to hit. If this is something that causes a lot of the bright colored foods that are ultra processed, super calorically dense, non satiating foods, to those to be consumed less, we won't see the effects of that for many, many years. And my fear, it's just a fear of mine, nobody else has to adopt it. But my fear is then people 20 years down the road will see it was the dyes. It's like, no, people stop buying. I mean, I remember when cosmic brownies were like awesome. Like those
Oh
were
yeah.
like the thing. And it's
They
like you
taste
look
nasty
at it and
now.
like the chocolate, the chocolate of the brownie just had a different texture, had a different look to it. And, the sprinkles were brighter. And I'm a big fan of sprinkles, don't get me wrong, but it's like everything was, man, so you just wanted a cosmic, even though like a brownie's a brownie in most cases, a brownie that you buy prepackaged is a brownie that you buy prepackaged, but then you add the sprinkles to it and you add the allure to it. Like, yeah, but it's again, everything is so calorically dense. It's just you're drawn to it, and then people are going to go back to eventually. You're going to say, "See, it was the dye." It's like, no, it was the food itself, because now we're going to
Yeah.
start potentially reverting back to a little bit more natural. Then the effects of that is, okay, it's a little bit more natural looking, and then you're going to go, it doesn't look as good, and
Yeah.
then you're not going to buy it, which is good, because then you're not going to be buying those foods, and then your caloric intake is going to reduce, and those are going to do things that are going to lead to better health outcomes, and you're going to be in a better place. But again, we're not going to see that. In my fear is that 20 years down the road, people are going to go, see, it was the dye. It's like, but it wasn't the dye for the reason that you think it was. It wasn't specifically the dye. It was the food that was the dye was tied to, which is what did it.
Yes. It,
And
so,
that's where I hope people don't.
oh yeah, no.
I'm,
So the
I'm
piggyback
hopeful,
exactly
but
on
people
what
in
you're
today's
saying.
society.
Oh no, I agree. To piggyback on exactly what you're saying. So here's something kind of like So yellow dyes 1, 2, 3, and 4 were banned in 1959 after they were found to be potentially linked to lesions and heart damage. Now, here's something that seems to be more prevalent today than probably 60 years ago, at least that we're aware of, right? Um, what do they what do they call it? It's very common. People get on their skin now.
All
Not
right, wait,
sclerosis. Gosh,
psoriasis.
psoriasis. Yes, I don't know. So it's a lot more common now than it used to be.
Hmm.
Uh, heart attacks, heart disease has rose, right? Now, those dyes that are supposedly linked to it aren't in those items anymore, but yellow 5 still is. Now, people ate things like lard and stuff like that was so common before the dyes were introduced, and heart attacks weren't as much of an issue. So even though yellow dye number 5, that's going to be one that's phased out, right? It's not directly linked to it, but what they've put it in to make it more appealing is linked to
Hmm.
it, like you were saying.
Yeah.
Like so, Mountain Dew probably would not look appetizing or have that bright green. If it didn't have a dye, you'd be looking at it like, well,
Right.
it's
Because like
just kind of
yeah,
clear.
the greens, so the greens will be more of like a deeper green.
Mm-hmm.
The reds will be a little bit more of like a cherry red. Again, blues will be a little bit more purple. Um, so and that I'm not sure necessarily if it was exactly where you're going. Um, but a lot of the things that we had issues for or issues with that have really kind of spiked again, so much of it does go back like in the wellness sense. There is a lot, every time you open up Instagram or Facebook or whatever social media platform, right? There's always somebody that's telling you, oh, don't eat this, don't eat this, don't eat this. This causes that. It's like, but it doesn't. And you're going to try and sell a product. And so, like, for instance, right, a lot of this is, cancer this, cancer that. Okay, well, you know, 3.5 years ago, my wife was diagnosed with cancer, right? And,
Mm-hmm.
she's 3 years cancer free.
Right.
But she went in and, did the treatment that epidemiologists went through, these people that actually know what they're talking about, right? And if the doctor, not just because of my background and my education, but if the doctor would have come in and said, "Oh, well, you can starve cancer, just don't eat. Just fast for 36 hours or 48 hours and then it's going to eat away the cancer." And it's like, "No."
Oh yeah, yeah. When you see
like
those
like those
videos
are
out
just
there, yeah.
and those are just like I said, those are things that the seed oil, the seed oil is another big one. And again, depending upon how long you want the conversation to be and how down into the rabbit hole you want to go, it's like no, seed oils aren't doing these things that you're trying to make claims that they are.
No,
And that's just
it's just happened. Some people have gone, well, as soon as I stopped doing the seed oil, this stopped at me, and it could have just been that something else in those products was doing it to them, or
it's
maybe they
well
had
not only
an allergy to it.
it's a possibility, but like when you look at so when they do a lot of these when people try to use scientific terms to fearmonger people and they create scientific terms that don't actually exist and they try to point to alleged studies. It's like a lot of the times they're pointing to animal studies that are in such super high doses, you're going to have complications before you reach that level that have nothing to do with what you're trying to prove the point on. So
Right.
whether it's artificial sweeteners, these seed oils and things like that, like again, they're animal studies in 99% of the cases, and the dosage is so excessively high that in day-to-day life we're never going to get to that level to be able to, like induce any type of like genetic instability or anything,
Right.
and that's and like I said, that's where I fear that they're missing the mark on this.
And genetic instability comes, but it's like, and when they talk about things linked to cancer, right? Like I lost my dad to cancer when he was, I think, 50, 51. And, you know, it was just crazy because when he got diagnosed, well, before he got diagnosed, when he started complaining about certain pains, they're like, oh, it's from whatever, you overstretched it. None of it was taken serious. But where I think that a lot of people have turned to things like Instagram or a podcast or anything besides traditional doctors for some basic medical advice is the fact that I think a big of it, part of it is the opiate crisis, right? They turned around and looked at it, said these doctors that I trusted pushed this on me. I've seen it ruin so many people's lives around me, and you're telling me to trust that person's advice. It's ruined the trust in the community, and it's ruined people's. I think, we always accept in America as everything for profit, and I think that the medical community, with things like the dyes coming out, that certain aspects of it were overlooked. Maybe the hazards, like even RFK did say, he goes, the hazards haven't been completely communicated to people. And something else that I found was, to me, was very troubling with it is that the food industry and packaging and certain additives, since I think 2000 or 1999, right around there, he said, has been voluntary. And out of 20 something additives, only four since that time in the last 20 something years were approved by the government, the FDA, and the scientists. The rest of it was done by self regulation from
Mhm.
the food industry, which and up until the late 90s and even still now, a lot of that was controlled by, like I said, like the tobacco companies, like their
Right.
parent companies owned it. And what did they specialize in? Addiction. That was their specialty,
Right.
and kind of like a pack of cigarettes. I think that, hey, like there's people out there like, my wife's grandma, she died of, if you want to call it, natural causes, right? But this lady smoked a pack or two of Virginia Slims a day, and she died in her 80s. Not of cancer, not of certain
Mhm.
things, right? Everything affects everybody differently,
Mhm.
and that's something that I think has to be factored in as well. But I think that there needs to be a lot more education on. There needs to be a lot more. Hey, you eat a lot of red dye number 7 or something. It can. There's been a possible, maybe not. Yeah, obviously you got to limit it, right? But possible correlations to ABC, or like kind of like the European system where it grades it on the level it could be bad or good for you. Instead of just something could be linked to cancer and like a tiny little sentence. Like maybe like everybody loves QR codes these days, right? Like give a QR code something. I think that it needs to be put out there because, like I said, like while certain things can't be proven, something that I've talked about before is in Germany that I think it's there is it's 1 in 130, 134, but in the United States, I think Joe Rogan had talked about it, is it's now 1 in 28 people are linked to it. And when you look at the some of the major differences, like you stressed on, physical activity, that's the top one. Like in Germany, I think the obesity rate's like less than 10%, and they eat more carbs than we do. Bread is to them like water is to us, and
Mhm.
they drink beer like it's putting your shoe on. It's common over
Right.
there on the weekends. You drink beer at breakfast. It's just normal. They drink, so I found out over there, kind of go off subjects for a quick second, is when you hike through the woods there, they have these little stations. Like they're like, yeah, like they have like the book things here, where you open up, get a book, put a
Mhm.
book in, but it's beer. So when you're hiking, you open it up and you grab beer, and people will stock it randomly. So you're just hiking down the woods, stop for a beer, and I'm like, man, in America, that would just not fly.
Nope.
You know,
Nope. It wouldn't. I
teenagers,
just.
but they but over there, like, one of the things they do is, they obviously have the better physical activity. They
Mhm.
don't have as much additives in their food, which I think is a big thing. But also, what I think is not talked about as much is because they don't have those additives, the food that people are consuming are filling them more, are filling a lot of their nutritional needs more. Their bodies don't, and their brains don't become as dependent on the dopamine rush to feel happiness, right? So they're able to go out into life and go, walking my dog and spending time with my spouse makes me happy.
Mhm.
Whereas right now in America, like, man, if new iPhone 17 comes out tomorrow, man, if you're in if you're under the age of 30 and you're not getting some kind of game plan to get that bad boy,
Right.
who are you?
Yep.
Are you even in a
Exactly.
circle of friends?
Right.
And we're over there, they have those things, right? They still have those rushes of, they're no
Mhm.
different than us, they like those things. But I think the fact that, things are tied a different way, it's got to be a multi-spectrum approach. You can't just be, well, if we eliminate dyes, you're going to be fine. It's got to be a
Exactly.
broad-based approach.
Exactly. And like I said, when when you look at, not to necessarily tie it into the tariffs, but when you look at all of the stuff that we bring in versus what other countries bring in, again, the demand is there. Well, the demand is here, and that same demand isn't across the globe. That's just reality, whether it's culturally, whether it's just the size of the population. But not everybody, which it's always fun sometimes, kind of a little off topic, but sometimes you come across those videos where it's like, the kids from UK trying like American food and stuff like that. And it's stuff that they don't have. And it's not necessarily because it's bad for you, or because it's just they don't have it culturally.
Right.
They don't have a
Yeah.
demand for it. And so that's why, again, yes, McDonald's is going to be different here than it is in India or, in China. The demand is different. That's just the reality of the situation. And I think that, like parenting, like our jobs, like anything, especially as it pertains to our health, the one person that is responsible is us.
Right.
And I get, based on what has happened the last few years, it's really opened some eyes, and people aren't going in with blinders saying, nope, the doctor knows, doctor knows, doctor knows. I think too many experts were too afraid to say, I don't know. And I think that has caused, because now people are in the boat of, the government was wrong, the government's trying to kill us, the government's trying to kill us. But then they go, oh, the FDA is banning this. Oh, yay! So you're looking for confirmation
Right.
bias,
Right.
because
Yeah.
then
And
again,
it's
because then that takes the
yes.
responsibility off of
Yes.
them. It's like when you're walking through the store, and again, I'm not trying to like harp on parents or anything, but if your kid grabs the Reese's cup, grab it back and put it on the shelf. Like, your kid doesn't have to have, and I understand like there is a difference when it pertains to like the socioeconomic situation for people. I understand that a lot of the more affordable options are the
Better.
less satiating type of foods that don't really have a lot of nutrition. I get that 100%. Now, if they're partnering with, and not to get too off topic, but if they're partnering with, because I know that people are freaking out about like Medicaid and food stamps and things like that with the administration. But if they're saying, hey, you can't purchase the sodas and you can't purchase this, and then if that money is, and if they add some more money to those, to those sponsored programs or entitlement, whatever it is that you want to call it, and it gets these people to purchase better options for them, totally for it, totally
Oh
for
yeah.
it. But unfortunately, you know when you can shut your kid up now, or if the only meal that they're going to get is, the sticky bun because it's $1. I mean, it's not everything is necessarily like the parents' fault, but there is a level where you kind of got to go, okay, um, don't rely on the government. If you're mad at the government for the last 5 years or the last 50 years, whatever it is, don't rely on the government to now say, because you've been saying that the government is corrupt and they want us all dead and it's all a big,
Mhm.
behind the scenes thing. Okay, well, when they say something is not, something's not going to be in a product anymore, are you going to then go, oh yeah, I trust the government again? No, you're not. You're like, that's just going to be it. Again, it goes back to personal accountability, personal responsibility in making those changes.
Yeah. And RFK does touch on that a lot about
Mm-hmm.
personal accountability. He
Yep.
does. But of course they don't show that part in the news clips.
Nope.
They only show him going bad, bad, bad. They don't actually show what
Mm-hmm.
the guy says. Like they try to paint him as this big anti-vaxxer, which he's not. All
Mm-hmm.
of his kids are vaccinated up until
Yep.
COVID. But what he's saying is the Europeans do it a little bit differently. A lot of them have pretty similar. I think they have like 3 or 4 less. I mean, I guess it depends which country. But the one thing that they seem to do is spread it out a little bit more. Like I
Mm-hmm.
say, one of my videos is that hey, grandma could have diseases when you give a baby a kiss on the forehead that could kill it. So you're telling me all those dead diseases and all those shots can't do something to that baby? Come on
Right.
now. You know, it's just saying like your system needs time to build, and I don't think that, and I think that the fact that we shove so much of it so fast, I think is what hurts people.
Mm-hmm.
And and I don't think they talk about that part enough. And like what he was saying is is like me personally, I did get the first, I got the Pfizer shot, the first and second one, you know, like because it was like a 2-part shot, you know.
Yep.
Um, but once they started saying you're going to need one every 6 months, probably, I was like, that don't seem right. You
So
know,
so
like that I think. Well, and then I think when it came out that Pfizer and most of these companies got a 75-year lawsuit exemption or whatever it is, or and they can hide the results for 75 years. That made people go, hey, maybe not necessarily like you blame them if something happens, but now I really blame you if something happens because now I feel like you got something to hide.
yeah, and it is, and when you've got such a because again, when you look at other countries, like they're out enjoying their day, they're out, they're walking, everyone's interacting with neighbors, but we've become so politically divisive that we're so hesitant to be out. It's like I'm just going to sit home now. And when you're going to sit home, you turn on the news, and again, we're so I don't want to say I don't think that we have a healthy thirst for knowledge and information. I just think we want something to confirm our bias. And
Yes.
and I think so, like going back to the vaccine, right? So I wasn't able, my wife's Canadian, and we weren't able to travel back and forth to see each other in our first full year of marriage because the border was closed. The only way you were able to do it is if you got the shot, right? So I I did the Pfizer. After my second dose, I had Bell's palsy for 4 months.
Wow.
Um, I my chiropractor, and for those who know me well and know who I've been going to for over 15 years, will know who it is. Um, but for liability reasons, I'm not going to mention him. Anyway, he said that in his 20-year career, at this point, he said that in his 20-year career, he had encountered 5 people total that had Bell's palsy. 5, like 20 years. And he said since the rollout of the vaccines, he had seen more patients in that 4-month window than he had seen in his 20-year career. And
Wow.
he said what exactly my thought was, and likely what I would have said. I'm not saying that it caused it, but when there is an increase like that, and the only thing that's changed, now, yeah, there were, maybe it could have been side effects from having COVID. And I know that, if you had COVID before you got the COVID shot, like the first one, then you had a really bad interaction. And usually the next day after your first COVID shot, if you had COVID before you had the shot,
Mhm.
you had some pretty gnarly, it was rough for you. And I know that was the case for me. Um, but it's so difficult to do crowd control when there's a fire on stage.
Oh
And
yeah.
I think that again they missed the mark 5 years ago because what hindsight's always 2020, don't get me wrong, but when they came out and said if you do this, then you don't have to worry about this and this, right? And that wasn't the case. But they spoke so with so much, not even conviction. They just spoke it as if it was the gospel. And it's like, okay, but a true expert would say, we don't know. And it's not to say that they should have gone out and say, guys, we have no idea what we're doing. But if you start off with, hey, this is a new virus based on the knowledge that we have from previous viruses, we haven't developed something this quickly before, but the intention is, for it to do this, and this, right? And if they would have rolled it out that way, I feel as though people would not have been like, dude, you guys up royally. And I think that because of that, a lot of it's cool because a lot of people are paying attention more to RFK and the vaccines and stuff. I just think that it's like there's those handful of things that a lot of people don't like to talk about because it's uncomfortable. And I think when a parent, and I can't speak on it specifically, you can speak to it a lot more than I can. But I'm sure even your wife would have a different viewpoint of it. It's when you say that there is something wrong, even though you're not attacking the child, when you say there's something wrong with your child, parents initially go, like no, no, like how dare you? And that's why, and that's another reason I feel as though he's getting such a pushback. It's just because it's
Yeah.
like you're attacking my kids. No, I'm not attacking your kid. You think I'm attacking your kid because of who the current administration is, but
Yes.
then it's like, no, it's I'm wanting you to help. And again, I'm not telling any parent, any person how they should feel about their kids. But if you're saying, if you if you look at the history of what your child potentially goes through or has already gone through, whether it's bullying, picked on, job opportunities in the future, prospects for a spouse, and like just long term, I'm not saying you should. People should have the mindset of I wish my kid never had this. I'm not saying that by any stretch. But if there's an option to prevent that from happening in the future, it's like, are you really telling me that if he would have said, all these kids are showing up being born with just one foot, and he would have said, hey, we're going to try and figure out what's going on with why these kids are only being born with one foot. We want kids to be able to have 2 feet. Like, are you going to be upset? Like, are you saying no? How dare you attack my kids? Like, we're not attacking your kids. We're not attacking
No.
you. We're trying to open up. We're trying to make people aware. We're trying to figure out what is going on. Are we making mistakes, in the medical field? Are we pushing too many vaccines? Are we not doing, the thorough studies and actually researching things properly? Is it like, are the doctors screwing up? Are the nurses screwing up? Is it something with genetics? Is it something with their nutrition? Is it something with the dyes?
Like one thing I think that they need to do is when they do these studies, I think the first thing that needs to be happening is no study related to anything like this should ever be funded by corporate dollars. I think that would be a good starting point, and I think that, we would need to find a way if you wanted to do that to publicly fund it, right? But maybe done through like independent organizations or whatever. But I think that, in order to have a little bit more of like an objective thing, right? Because the cigarette companies use studies for how long to say, nicotine's not addictive, it's perfectly safe.
Right.
So and I'm not saying that a lot of companies do that, but we definitely found out with the opioid crisis that even in this day and age that there's companies who will still do it to make a buck, and
A
they're
hundred
paying your
percent.
doctor off, and they don't even give your doctor the accurate information. They give your doctor a study that was funded by them to cover up different things.
Right.
That's not necessarily saying that that's every company, because I don't think everybody's that vile.
Hmm.
um but it's like, so like, when they talk about like ADHD, right? ADHD is something I've thought a lot about, especially with my son being autistic, is, 20, 30, 40, 50 and years ago, and pretty much every year behind that, you went through a lot more physical exhaustion. So by the time that kid came home, or even when that kid went to school, you didn't have all that pent up energy, all that pent up feeling.
Hmm.
So even if ADHD was there, you didn't notice it, because if you wear a kid with the ADHD out, they are going to be able to pay attention to something until they fall asleep. Most, I'm
Hmm.
sure there's plenty that are not, but I think that ADHD maybe isn't as much of a disability sometimes as they make it out to be. Like, I think that it's a natural. I think it's more of a natural thing than we realize, because I think
Yep.
it's what helps us multitask. I also think it
Hmm.
helps us pay attention to certain things. I think it's just a function, right? Some of us function differently. But to me, the problem is today's day and age, we put a label as there's something wrong with you because you have ADHD. There's something wrong with you because you're autistic. The guy who invented the computer to break the Nazi code, right? He was considered Asperger's, right? But in today's day and age, people go, well, he's got Asperger's. He acts a little funny because he's got Asperger's.
Yep.
But back then and before that, it was just, yeah, he's weird, but he's
Right.
cool and he's really smart, and he's got his
Hmm.
stuff together, so he's cool. He's part of the
Right.
group.
Yeah.
Whereas now it'd be like, ooh, hey man, ooh, time out. You
Yep.
don't want to offend his mom because she's going to come in here with Jeffrey Feiger and tear us down.
Right. I think a lot of it too is eh, we've so like going into COVID. I remember just before COVID was a thing, right? There was a push for mental health, mental health,
Mhm.
mental health, right? And I'm not saying all of it, but a lot of it was self-diagnosed. Like everyone was self-diagnosed ADD or ADHD, right?
Oh yeah.
And then COVID hit, and then there were legitimate cases of mental health, right? And then so you had a pretty big effect of people that were just like, again, self-diagnosing and whatever. And then COVID hit, and then there were legitimate. So then you had the people that pre-COVID were saying that they had ADD or ADHD mixed with the people that had the legitimate mental health. And then, but those were the ones that were grandstanding the most. And it's kind of like the medicinal marijuana. I mean,
Yeah.
some people are super support. People think that you should be able to be stoned all the time. Other people hate everything, and then there's other people that are in between. But when you look at the initial approach of it, it was, for medicinal purposes. There's some legitimacy to it, right? And then it expanded. Rather than helping people who legitimately need it, that movement was hijacked by people who just wanted to be stoned and be out there in the world, right?
Oh yeah,
At
I've been
the
guilty of that
time,
before.
and it's like, but the people that legitimately need it got the pushback and the blowback, and the government was saying no to this and no to that, and people were like, oh, we don't need it, but there were people that legitimately did. And it's the same thing now, not comparing cancer and medicinal marijuana and mental health these days, but it's the people who just want affirmation, um that are grandstanding the most. And it's like, but you're not the people that need it. There's legitimate cases. And I think the medical community has just gotten to a point to where, because they're afraid of lawsuits, or because we're such a, because back in the 80s, the 90s, early 2000s, you used to be able to go to different doctors and
Yes.
you could get a prescription, and from one doctor, and then go to another doctor and get another prescription, 6 7 prescriptions you could be filled with. And I think that the medical community has just said, you know what, you guys pounded down the door so much, we're not putting a lock on it anymore. Why?
Yeah.
They're going to give us money. They're going to give us money. If we give you what you want, we get paid, and we're just going to be good with it. And I'm not saying that every doctor and clinician and stuff are all about just being prescription happy, but I think so many things have become so convoluted and so mixed up and distorted, and that's led us to, sadly, where we are today, where, again, we're going back to looking for that boogeyman. Oh, it's your fault. It's your fault. It's your fault. And it's like, no, no, it's not.
The problem is the boogeyman has evolved over time, right? So the boogeyman started out with one thing, then it picked up another, then it picked up another, then it picked up another, and then so now that I think that's why, like we were talking, like it has to be a broad based approach because it's more than just one thing that has caused it, right? But
Mm-hmm.
it's also, how do you balance it? Like there's got to be balance because cell phones aren't going away, technology's not going away, none of that's going away, right? So how do you balance it? I think things like GoPro cameras, I think things like that are great inventions. Why? Because it gets people to want to film themselves out doing something. So they
Right.
can do the things that they want to do,
Mm-hmm.
but they're outside doing it and they're filming themselves. See,
Yep.
like, to me, that's a perfect merge of, hey, this is what we need. This is a technology that can help us provide it. And it's really, uh, so like talking about that is that so I'm looking at Ohio State Health and Discovery from Ohio State University. I know you're probably a U of M fan, but I'm not endorsing them or anything. But
I'm not a UFM
uh,
fan. Stayed
oh,
all the way.
hey, me too, me too. Um, food dyes can make some children and teens hyperactive and moody or irritable, according to available research. And if they regularly eat food with dye, high strung and anxious might become their norm. Now, it even says in this study, some children, but the problem is when you turn on the news is going to read it like this: food dyes make children and teens hyperactive and moody or irritable. They leave
Yep.
out the some part, you
Yep.
know, and I think that some part is critical, right? But like, you got a lot of people like you're saying self-diagnosing, right? But if they would include that something, that would also help them look at their children and go, you know what, man, before Johnny was really got addicted to that Kool-Aid, he wasn't so Johnny wasn't so off the wall,
Right.
like because sugar, like with certain diabetics, right? It really goes after them. And, sometimes you're finding out that diabetes isn't always diet based. You know, for the most part, I think it is, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
Because there's been a lot of people that have been able, but that's not always the case.
Right.
I don't think it would be as common, if we didn't have those things. But it's crazy how they are finding that it is in certain cases it does affect hyperactivity, right? It's like going back to like the casinos making you addicted. It's a lot of the things we do in life are based around dopamine modification. How
Hmm.
do we modify our ability to be happy rather than modifying our ability to understand how to be happy? I don't think
Yep.
we teach how to be happy. And I think that goes like, you need the bright red object, you need the dye, you need this, you
Exactly.
need that. We
Yep.
don't teach ourselves how to be satisfied.
Hmm.
Like, how do I be satisfied that I just not that I have like I just bought $100,000 car, which I
Right.
wish I had that kind of money, right? But you know but like if you've got that kind of money, when the next model comes out that somehow has changed and is big and you love it, you're like, oh man, I want that, right?
Right.
But in reality, what a waste of money that is, right? I mean, I'm guilty of it too with certain things, right? Oh man, the new one came out, I want to get it. But it's like we haven't taught ourselves how to be happy, where I feel like 100 years ago you didn't really have a choice but to teach yourself how to be happy, because you didn't have as many distractions. So
Every
you had to learn how to be happy, and I think that's part of the problem today is we don't have to learn how to be happy, because when we're bored with something we just pick up the next object and that gives us a quick dopamine.
you know so
And
we have between so many more options. It's funny because talking about artificial food dyes, and I know the big shift now is artificial intelligence, but we live in such an artificial world now that if you don't get that gratification that you're looking for, you can go online and you can get it.
yes,
And it's
yeah,
and it kind of it goes, and it's an unrelated topic, but it's like again, going for the dyes that make something seem more appealing. And then you'll see even on like social media, you'll see especially in the wellness area, you'll see these airbrushed images of what they'll do is, whether it's a guy or a girl, they'll after their workout or whatever, they'll say, this is for Instagram, but this is reality. And it's like, okay, but if you want the idea and the presentation to be, it's not all glitz and glamour, then stop filtering the photos, stop
yes,
enhancing things, and post what reality is. Like that's
yeah,
just because it's like one of those half truth, whole lie situations. It's like, again, you're still seeking some type of validation. And it's not accusing anyone. It's not saying you're doing anything necessarily inherently bad. It's just you you're not posting reality. Why are you not posting reality? Because of the blowback. Okay. Well, what's going to change the blowback? The only thing that prevents the blowback is the super modified, you know, when you're working out and enhancing things in certain areas, adding weights to the bar, or whatever it is. Like that, if those are the only things that are going to prevent the blowback, then you're not being genuine. So the things that you're claiming to seek of having that realness, that's never going to be, because you're not normalizing being normal, whatever that is. And that's the same with, again, people with ADHD, like legitimate ADHD or legitimate mental health, or, someone, who is on the spectrum, whatever it is. It's like, you're just looking
no,
for
it's
validation. And if you don't get it here, we live in a world today where it is available somewhere.
right. And so looking more of like how food, some of the things that, and like that we've seen rise, at least that I have, and hyperactivity also has rose, irritability has rose in children. And I think that is definitely affect some of the things with how kids behave today. Inattentiveness because mom has to go to work, so that doesn't teach the kids how to pay attention. There's nobody at home going, hey, pay attention, do this, hey, pay attention, do this, hey, pay attention. It wires your brain to pay attention. Now there's nobody
Yep.
making you learn how to pay attention.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not, and I'm not trying to go down the rabbit hole of gender roles, right? Because it could be a
Right.
guy that stays home and does that with the kids, right?
Right.
It could be mom. It doesn't have to be. But I think having that presence to do that teaches kids. You know, they talk about restlessness. I mean, bad sleep habits are killing Americans. You know, and when you look at, and I'm not on the whole, organic thing, because when you really look at a lot of the organic things in the supermarket, a lot of it's kind of just, it's a fallacy, and it's not even
It's
really
it's
organic.
it's just a marketing play to get you to spend more
Yeah.
money. That's all it
And,
is.
they talk, yeah, they talk about aggression, mood swings, sleep disturbance, difficulty falling asleep. Because me, I'm one of them people, I fall asleep with the TV on. Now, if the TV goes off after I fall asleep, it doesn't bother me. Yeah, I mean, but here's the problem, though. If I wake up in the middle of the night and have to go to the bathroom, TV goes back on until I fall back asleep. It's just, and it's just, it's how I'm wired. But if I don't have the TV on, I will lay there awake, like
Mhm.
wide awake. It is impossible for me to sleep.
Yep.
And that's, to me, I think that's part of that dopamine thing. Now, to be fair, do I think that is particularly dangerous? Not really. I think that's just kind of one of those things that where, it's kind of like if you, I don't know, you walked in around the block every night before you go to bed, that if you didn't do it, your body's like, what is going on? This is not
Yep.
my routine.
Mhm.
Something's off, and human beings work very well with routines. Humans are
Absolutely.
routine based. Same with children. Children, all most studies have proven that children that have good routines prosper.
Yep.
And I think that, that goes down to, like, if you're eating something like a red dye number 4 or a 3 that is bad for you, and then on top of it, you're not getting the sensory things that kids need. You're not getting that redirection that kids 50 years ago were getting at
Hmm.
home, and not just at home, in the community. Because when I was
Right.
growing up, it was perfectly okay if your neighbor seen you doing some stupid shit to whoop your ass.
Hmm.
Now it's, hey, you
Yep.
touched my kid, we're going to court. I'm calling the police, and the whole neighbor's out there ready to fight. Because
Yep.
I remember growing up, when I would stay the night at a friend's house, my dad would be like, if he just does something stupid, you've got my permission to beat the hell out of him.
Yep.
And I knew what he was
Yep.
meaning. You know what I mean? Like, not, but
Right.
you got, if you need to rough him up, that's fine. Whereas today, that is not okay.
Hmm.
And I'm not gonna lie, if somebody cracked my kid, even if he did something wrong, man, I'd have to really be like, ugh. It's a hard thing to accept. But at the same time, if you screwed up, man, you screwed up. you
Exactly.
know, and and I think that that's not there, and I think that hurts kids' ability to learn how to respect somebody that is not in their household. It eliminates their ability to recognize this. So, like, for instance, kind of tie the food dye into it, right? So the food dye is causing irritability or aggression. Well, if you don't got those things, like, hey, if my kid's acting a fool out and about, and you're there, to the other parent, you've got my permission. So it doesn't teach that kid the accountability of, just
Hmm.
because the authority figure's not around doesn't mean you don't have to act right. Those things are gone.
Yep.
And, so if the food dye, even though if it's not necessarily bad for you, but if it can contribute to that, and then on top of it, you don't have that other natural safeguard in place, well, now that dye becomes a problem. Because now
Right.
that dye is making something that's natural even worse. It's natural for kids to be jerks. It just is.
Absolutely.
I mean, it doesn't make it okay, right? You learn at 15 you're a jerk, but you learn at 30 that's something at 15 you're like, ah, man, that's stupid.
Right.
But
Yeah.
it's part of growing up. It doesn't make anything okay, not okay. But I think that some of those things, like, aren't looked at, right. So if you're going to get rid of dye, how do we get those basic foundations in place? And my lord, for everything, it is not the school's job to raise your child.
Exactly.
It is
Exactly.
my job. And I think that, it just kind of like, I don't want to say like going off base, right? But when people talk about, and people say this is why Democrats lost the election, because of the woke movement. Well, the woke movement became such a problem because parents started putting too much
Mhm.
of raising their kids in the hands of the school. If parents were a little bit, and I'm not criticizing any parents, because my wife works from home 4 days a week. She only goes to the office one day, but before that, she went to the office every day. I work, but my kids were always around someone that had that foundation.
Right.
And like my in-laws wouldn't allow certain things, they're not going to allow, if you're a jerk, then my in-laws are like the nicest people on the planet, right? But they may correct you, but then when I get there, is they're gonna be like, hey man, your
Right.
son was blah blah blah, and that's going there's going to be hell to pay, and I just don't think that you know kind of like encompassing it is a lot of it is like you were saying they're off the mark, and then when you're off the mark, you miss certain things like aggression being related to the kid not having that outlet, or mood swings is that kid not being around enough other, like if it's a young man, like being around other young men, you learn how other young men think.
Mm-hmm.
And not talking about your two or three friends that you got into that like little clique with that are only ones seem
Right.
to ever understand but as you're around a bunch of others, like even though you may not interact with them, you see you're like, oh man, that's one effed up individual.
Right.
Don't do that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there's so much isolation now that those things don't, none of these things impact as whereas when a lot of these things are introduced, even if it did affect it, there were still so many natural safeguards in place.
Right.
I mean, to me, I kind of like relate it to, um, what do they call it? Your catalytic converter on your car.
Mm-hmm.
It helps eliminate certain things, right? So it makes it, how they, it can still be bad for you, but it helps measure it. And I think that, some of the natural things that we had from, like 300 years ago, they'd have been like, yeah, your kid's like that because he hasn't been outside all day.
Right.
That'd have been their first thing. They'd have been like, go put him outside for a week and let me know how he acts.
Yep.
And I'd probably say a majority, if not the vast majority, maybe not. I could be wrong. I'm not a doctor, not a scientist. I work in the food industry and I'm a middle manager. Okay.
All
So
right.
I'm not a pro, but this is just coming from somebody who works in this industry,
Right.
um, and it's just a little, it's just crazy, like all these things impact it. It's
Yep.
just, they do. And it's just so weird. I work for a company, where they generally have traditionally used very infiltrated products,
Mm-hmm.
But they have gone more and more and more towards non-antibiotic, sustainable supplies, some things that aren't going to be as bad for you, right? So
Right.
if you're doing that and then you eat it in moderation, like I've learned, because when you're getting all this food for free that you think tastes real good, is definitely the number one way I lose weight. I gain weight, I should say. But once I learned how to moderate a little bit, because in my job I can't just not eat it. I got to be able to test it to tell my people, hey, you got to do ABC differently. But you got to learn that
Mm-hmm.
satisfaction you get from that food in that moment is not everything. It's
Mm-hmm.
not everything. To me, there's more satisfaction doing a podcast, talking
Right.
about it. Right there's more satisfaction, and I've got a 1-year-old dog who you let him go in the backyard, and with my other, she's 1.5. Zooming around the garage for an hour. Make sure they're not rolling around in a dirt pit they've dug somewhere in the yard.
Yep.
And it's, but those things just, I think those things are important, and it's not there, and I think that kind of goes back to, like, for adults from your end, is the physical activity if you're a grown adult in the working life and have a family.
And it's, I mean,
How do you encompass your kids on it?
so like, typically speaking, when you go to, if you go to a doctor's office, for your kid or a pediatrician, and you say these things are going on, it's like their number one thing is they say, we'll cut that out. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, but what is your basis for it? And not to try and like school anyone, but it's like, but what is your basis on it? Because I've had, unintended, back and forth with doctors for numerous different reasons. I'm like, but when you say this causes this, why do you think that causes that? And it's like, why is your first solution, all right, get rid of it? I'm not saying that we should be supporting all of these things, but it's like, well, your kid is drinking Gatorade and they're all wound up and they're not paying attention. Well, look at, it's not the sugar necessarily, but it's like, you just gave your kid, 50 grams of sugar. What the hell did you think was going to happen?
Right.
They're going to
Eh,
be, so it's not, they don't have, ADD or ADHD because they consumed a Gatorade that had a dye necessarily. It's like, why is it get rid of Gatorade? What about, if you took them from the Gatorade to the Gatorade Zero? 100%, I guarantee you would see a difference. Why? Because there's not the added sugar. And if you want to go the artificial sweetener route, like you lose there on a science based, like, human randomized control trials are the gold standard, right?
mhm.
And when they're talking about some of these studies, especially for the artificial sweeteners, again, we're talking in dosages that you're never, ever, ever going to hit, and we're talking about them in animal studies, and so, like, I'm not saying that your kid absolutely should be 100% drinking Gatorade, but one of the options is, okay, go from Gatorade to Gatorade Zero, because
Agreed.
again, your kid's not getting the sugar. They're still getting some benefit from being properly hydrated with the added electrolytes, which is a good thing. And I bet you're going to notice a difference. And it's
Well, the
going to
big
get,
thing, and I don't know about Gatorade now, but or even Gatorade in general, like the ingredient, but I know like the one big thing in terms of like artificial sweeteners, and it can be related to food dye. Um, High fructose corn syrup. To me, that is like one of the most dangerous additives. And I want to say dangerous in terms like, oh my god, it'll kill you. I'm talking in terms of if something is bad for you, right? Like eating 10 slices of pizza or drinking a Mountain Dew, it gives it a different flavor. Where when you drink something that has, for instance, like a Mountain Dew with cane sugar, it's not as enticing. Corn syrup makes things more enticing. But corn
Mhm.
syrup is also they found is not that good for you. It's linked to diabetes in a lot of areas, and from what I understand, is it like stimulates certain things, like in terms of like sugar and in your head more.
well, a lot of it though too is, again, it's because the biggest thing goes back to, and yes, maybe microplastics and maybe, you know, some food dyes, but I think we're like, when you go to the ocean, you're going to fill it up. You're going to fill the ocean up with boulders. You're not going to fill it up with pebbles. And I think that,
Right.
when we're looking at it, and it's like, you really have to kind of dissect it. It's like, it, I almost view it as if you have a corporate job and then your boss comes by at the end of the day and says, "Hey, how come you didn't sell any cars today? You're a car salesman." And you go, "Well, you know what? I didn't have any paper for my desk." Oh, okay. Like, yeah, having paper is helpful, but it doesn't prevent you from selling a car. And so when you look at things like the high fructose corn syrup, is, again, it's not necessarily saying that it's good for you, and I'm not necessarily an advocate for promoting those things. Is it's not good for you for the reasons that have been trained as to why they're not good for you.
Right.
It's like
It's
you're
not good
you're
for you in terms of
consuming,
the amount.
you know, not necessarily sugary drinks, but you're consuming calorically dense drinks.
Hmm.
That's the issue.
Yeah, the amount of
Because
sodium.
when you swap out, you know, a Mountain Dew for Dew Zero or water, or, any, like, artificially, non sweetened beverages, you know, all health markers improve. All health markers improve. So whether you're looking at all rate mortality, you're looking at, cardiovascular disease, any health marker that you want to look at, when you swap out fully sugared beverages that are calorically dense, when you swap them out for water, for coffee, for tea, for, you know Coke Zero, or, Diet Pepsi or whatever, the effects are, I don't want to say they're so profound, but there's such a huge difference, because it's going to lower your rates of obesity. And we all know that obesity is the biggest contributing factor to not just the chronic health disease, but all cause mortality. So all
Yes.
cause, right?
Yep.
And when you start making those changes, again, it's not, there are mechanisms, but the mechanism isn't the result. And I
Right.
think that, like I said, we we go, oh, it's because of this. And if that is the reason, if we start pulling away these dyes, and again, I'm not against pulling away the dyes. I don't think that they're needed. I don't think that they're necessary. But if it helps people to go, you know what, I'm not going to have this soda. I'm not going to have this. I'm all for it, because then that means, you know what, you're going to make the small change where you're not going to drink the soda. So you're not going to drink the soda. So you're going to feel a little bit better because you're going to start losing the weight because you're not drinking the soda. And then you're going to start moving more and then you're going to start getting active. And I'm 100% all for that.
Well, I think, yeah,
I
get rid of
think
that.
I think that it's the statement of, or the presentation of, it's the dye's fault that you have cancer. It's the dye's fault that you have obesity.
Right.
It's the dye's fault that
Right.
you have to go to the doctor. And then there's this massive conspiracy if that it's because of the dye, and the dye is because the government said to put it in there because they're paying the company, and the company's like, but when they say something you like, you're like, yeah, that's awesome. It's like, again, it's that asymmetrical type of, searching for that confirmation bias. And if we don't, like we were talking about, if we don't address the root cause of these issues, sadly, nothing is going to change. Now, can we
Yeah.
reverse engineer it? There's a possibility, but if I've learned anything in my time here, it's that people don't like change because
No, no.
they take it they take it from 0 to 100, or they take it from 100 to 0 right away. And again, I'm hopeful that, hey, you made some changes, and great, and so hopefully that is something that builds upon. But your point, I feel like we're trying to point the finger at something that isn't the problem. The problem is behind. Like that's just an easy target to
Right. It's
say,
core.
that's
Yeah.
that's the reason. It's like, no, but that is not the reason. The reason is behind that. Just open it up just a little bit, because once you open it up, you're going to see the problem.
Right.
It's
It's correlation. And that's where I go with it. Like, so, like you're saying, like so that's where I guess I go with it is the dyes and how they're used make the things that they go in more addictive, and it makes
Mhm.
us default to those items,
Mhm.
which combined with some of the other ingredients that can be in there, combined can be terrible for you. For instance, what we know as Ritz crackers here in Europe are banned because they contain something that's linked to a carcinogen. Now, granted, it's a very small one, but it's linked to it, right? So now let's say you combine something like that with, and I don't know the full ingredient list on a Ritz cracker, but let's say you had a yellow dye that can be linked to heart disease, and then on top of it, you got a carcinogen, right? But, those things are making it bright, making that Ritz cracker more attractive, even though that Ritz cracker is a ticking time bomb if you consume too many of it. Not that that's the case. I'm just, paraphrasing here. Um, but if you ever get bored, look into that European study on that, and you would be surprised about how bad Ritz crackers actually are. Um, which was surprising to me, but
Yeah.
it,
Yes.
it's
But
it's
then, like,
crazy.
so like I I remember, when we were kids, like usually if you said, like, your parents would say, hey, don't do that, and you would say why,
Mm-hmm.
and your parents would say because, right?
Yep.
And then you just kind of left it alone. And I feel like we started questioning things, not because we were legitimately interested, but because it was just, well, let's just question it. And so, like, a lot of the things, like, like, oh, terrible red dye 40, right? It's got the evil benzene in it, right? Benzene causes
Mm-hmm.
cancer. Okay, great. So benzene is also in eggs. Do you know how you prevent it from getting to that level? Don't eat 1,000 eggs in one sitting. Like, it's the dosage as well. And so I think that it's going back to, as silly as it is, with your kids, don't eat that. Why? Because it's bad for you. And leaving it at that, because, like, I know it's real simple, but that's really one of the issues, like I said, that we have. And like we've been talking about, it is a whole, not a whole of government, but it is a whole world approach, or at least in today's society, like it's that massive approach. Because yes, it is, yeah, you can add in the yellow dyes. Don't die on me.
I'm just just getting over a cold. Change of
always
weather.
always fun. So like for instance, right? So like intermittent fasting, right? So most people know what intermittent fasting is. Yep.
Woo, I'm okay now. Woo.
Breathe through, man. Fight the good fight.
My water went down the wrong pipe. Getting
Goes
over a
down the
cold at the
wrong
same
tube, man.
time.
It's always fun.
But yeah,
But
no,
so
I
like
feel like
so kind of going back a little bit to what you were saying. So like for those who are familiar with intermittent fasting, right? And if you are, great. If you're not, basically you go long stretches of not eating, and then you condense your total caloric intake, your total food intake down to a short period of time, right?
yeah,
Well, those who do intermittent fasting are more susceptible and tend to have higher rates of eating disorders. Does that mean intermittent fasting causes eating disorders? No, it's the correlation versus causation. And
yeah.
so my again, one of my I'm not suggesting that any of this is necessarily not bad, but is it the yellow dye or is it the red dye that's causing it? Possibly, but man, you'd have to really, really, again, it's a mechanism. It's not the outcome, but the overconsumption. If you're eating nothing but Ritz crackers all the time, you're going to have some issues with or without the red dye. So when we're taking the cosmic brownies, removing that red dye, it's great because it's not going to seem as appealing. So it increases the likelihood that someone's not going to purchase it. But if you remove the red dye and someone still purchases the brownie, we're still going to have the same result. And we're going to
Right.
all be standing around going, but you said the dye did it. It's like, so I'm hoping it's that first step into really kind of getting that ball rolling. I'm hopeful for it. And
Well,
again,
yeah,
I'm not I'm not an advocate necessarily for saying consume ultra, but no, it as much whole foods as you can consume, minimalized processed, absolutely. But
moderation.
moderation is huge. Again, as I touched on, it's over 3,900 calories a day is the average US caloric consumption. 3,500 calories is equivalent to a pound, right? In less than 20 minutes of physical activity. So unless those things changes, and again, I'm hopeful, and this is where, like I said, I feel like they're missing the mark. Unless they're going to be able to tie the I'm big on, are these vaccines causing some of these things? I'm hopeful that they come up with some type of answers. But making a statement, because then you build this coalition of the exact opposites of the Fauci coalition, where it was, you had people, if you didn't get vaccinated, right, people wanted you to die. If you didn't
Yep.
get
Yeah.
vaccinated, you were trying to kill
How
grandma. And it's like,
childish
guys,
was
no,
that?
that's not it. Because there were people who were pregnant, or maybe there were, maybe someone's, grandma or someone had cancer or something like that, and they couldn't get vaccinated. I'm not trying to kill grandma. That's not it. And so like that, and my fear again is that you've got so many people that are, so you're only going to listen, if you're only going to listen to the people that confirm your bias, then you become, and this is a right left thing, then you become everything that you've tried to be, that you've claimed that you're
Against.
against. Because so many of the
Oh, yeah.
people on, not everyone, but it's a majority of the people that do tend to come from the left, where they say, I know they do it on talk shows and all this stuff. I've seen it on social media big time. I watched, I I think I lost over 100 and some odd friends since the election, and it's like, guys, you're missing it. Where you hear the people say, I can't talk to somebody if you did this or if you voted this way, or it's like, okay, but don't become that. And I feel like we're walking that line, and it's going from that we're doing okay, we're staying in our lane, to people going that Fauci extreme of, if you're not vaccinated, you want grandma to die, and I hope you die. And then it's the, oh well, I can never trust a doctor. Let's fill our food bowls full of nothing but butter. Butter's processed, by the way. It's like, so it's, again, that pendulum swung huge this way, and now I'm fearful that it's going to swing huge this way. It's like, that's why it's great to be in the middle, man. Because it's like,
No, no,
you guys are
that's the
crazy.
whole purpose of
You
this.
guys are crazy. It's never, man. That's
That's
some
why
light
I
switches
named
have
this
dimmer switches, man.
podcast that way. Oh,
Exactly.
you know, it's just the middle ground, because it's like, there's so many perspectives, and I feel like every perspective has a lot that it can contribute to the other,
Mm-hmm.
but everything's taught to be either or.
Yep.
And this isn't to make it like necessarily political or anything, but I think where that mentality kind of became popular was after 9/11. And it became, you're either with us or against us, and it was something that they pushed, right? And I get why they did it. I'm not necessarily against that, right?
Right.
And I'm not minimizing anything about 9/11, but it was that mentality that became a part of everything we did. You're either with us or you're against us. Sports picked up on it, games picked up on it, everything. You're either with me or you're against me, and that
Yep.
started the erosion
Mm-hmm.
of a lot of that stuff. And in a time of war, yeah, I mean, that's always going to be the case. You're not going to be like, hey, go
Right.
shake hands with the enemy type of thing. But I think that it just spread just like everything else these days. And it kind of all just like it ties in together, that to a point. God, this is just like, I guess it's kind of hard to describe. Is I feel like too much social media has really hurt us.
100%.
Too much exposure has hurt us. To me, it's no different than like you're saying, the crazy amount of food dyes. Crazy amount of food. Well, crazy amount of time on Facebook, and by God, that thing is addictive.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not gonna lie. Probably outside of if I'm sharing something from this, 75% of the time on Facebook, I'm just looking at shorts or reels, whatever they call it on there.
Right.
It's usually tied into, like, I like watching The Blacklist sometimes, or The Sopranos. So
Right.
and if I'm in the living room with the kid and I flick through something and it's The Sopranos, of course there's a bunch of F bombs and wife's going, your 6-year-old. I'm like, oh man, yeah. I was like, I look at her, I'm like, when I was growing up, everything around me said the F word, and I didn't really think nothing of it. So I don't really think, like, my dad used worse language than that, just talking about something.
We all do that. Actually, my wife was talking. Who was she? Talking? My wife was talking with a family member, and she had said something to the effect of, oh, I can't. I think she was talking about her niece or something, though, the way that she had went out one time or something, I can't recall. And she goes, well, I can't really say much because, when I was that age, the things that I wore. And I'm like, that, yeah, that's the most default fallback. But at the same time, like, okay, is it really a far stretch to say, like, well, I can't get mad at my kids for, shooting heroin because, one time I puffed a joint when I was, 18 years old. Like, stop trying to, again, you're trying to affirm things, and, like, when you sit back and you look and go, man, things have really changed. And so much of it does also stem from that. It's from the look back of, well, I can't really say anything because of the things so if you shoot someone, your kid has the justification to shoot people. Like, is that what you're trying to draw? Like, it's like, and I just think, like I said, it's such a fallback, and as we've kind of touched on, it's such a whole approach of it's not their fault, but they didn't know how to parent. And then we switched over into how do I become your friend rather than your father? How do I become your friend rather than your mother? And I think that transition, it was a perfect storm with technology, with the evolution of, going from cell phones and flip phones to tablets, and then everyone had internet access, and and then by the time not even half the people had dial up, everyone had cable, cable modems and things like that. So everything did become so much more easily accessible. And then there are bad actors out there who take advantage of that, and then they see opportunities, and like,
Oh
it's
yeah, no
unfortunate.
man, could go on all day.
100%.
That's but all right, man. I didn't realize we've almost been at this 2 hours.
Yeah. Can keep
But we've
keep,
definitely
keep
covered a lot. And I think this is going to hopefully get a lot of people talking. Again, the whole point of this was two different perspectives, right? Like I look at a lot about correlation, right? Like I don't necessarily believe everything causes something,
Mhm.
but I definitely think it's worth a look to see what the correlation can be.
Yeah,
You know, like
absolutely.
like the Europeans, right? Like they space their schedule out a little bit.
Mhm.
They do these certain things, and okay, maybe they don't look at the kid that does a certain little thing away and go, well, he's autistic. No, they don't. Why don't they consider that autistic? Like, what's the
Right.
reason? Like I feel like they do a better job of correlation. They go, if I leave the apple out all day around a dog, or not dog, any animals, they're going to eat it. So they realize the correlation. If I leave my food out in front of the animals, they're going to eat it. They realize that not just the apple. Whereas over here we look at we dissect everything so far down that
I
it minimizes everything else, because we go, okay, well, we know if you consume too much red dye number 4, it's 7,500 times this is this. But we don't look at, um, okay, well, the red dye makes something that in large quantities can be bad for you. We don't look at that makes it more appealing, right? And then when these companies, right, like if you're on your phone, oh my god, McDonald's pops up every 5 seconds on social media, or a lot of these companies. So you got the dye that makes it there, right? Then the company's highlighting the dye, and they're pushing it in your face every chance they get. So it's kind of like the correlation of the dye linked with everything else, to me, is like
it's
a big part of
yeah.
it, right?
And there's definitely, and that's why, like, one of the reasons I always say, correlation doesn't equal causation, because one of the examples I've always used is, in the summer months, murder rates go up.
Yep.
In the summer months, ice cream sales go up. Does that mean that people are buying ice cream and killing people? No.
No.
Like, the correlation doesn't and so I think that it's, again, it's the, is it the dye? Ooh, according to all the information that we have available right now, in humans, very, 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 very not likely. However, what is the dye attached to? Now we're getting somewhere. It's not the red dye in the red meat, in the ground beef that you're getting. It's not the red dye that's doing it. It's the excessive consumption of that red. And red meat, it's not necessarily bad for you. It is really good for you, but it's the overconsumption of the red meat, and especially because when you got red meat, you get the extra lean stuff that's a 96.4, and that's $8 a pound or $9 a pound at the market. And then, you get the stuff that's not as lean, that's the, 70/30, or, 73/27, whatever it is that you're getting. And that's $3 a pound. And then you go with the stuff that's cheaper and it's higher in fat. So you're consuming more calories that way. And again, those are the things that are contributing. So it's not necessarily the dye, it's what is the dye attached to. And I think if they
Right.
expand upon that, I think that's why, like I said, I'm hoping that I think we're looking at pebbles when we should be looking at the boulder. But I think if that pebble leads to the boulder, if they follow it up with, yeah, the red dye is, or the blue dye is attached to Captain Crunch berries. Um, it's not the, okay, remove the blue dye. Okay, but it's the crunch berries. And why is it the crunch berries? Again, it's a very calorically dense, non-nutritious food. Kids are overeating it. So they're getting a big old rush of, they're probably doing a double, triple serving. So that's 50 to 75 grams of sugar. And then you want them to go sit in a classroom for 8 hours. And you wonder, and then you go, oh, it's ADHD.
I
No,
can't even sit through a meeting if I've had a
the
large
kid
cup
the
of
kid just
coffee. I
had
got to
a
go to the bathroom.
the kid just, I mean, again, it's the same thing as slamming a 20-ounce soda. That's a full throttle soda. Not a zero or a diet. And you think it doesn't matter if you're 14 or 40. You consume that much sugar, you're gonna want to get up and move around. And
Yes.
again, you feed these kids this food with or without the dye. You give them that much sugar and then expect them to sit for the next 8 hours. You wonder why they're not going to pay attention. And then how do you reward that? You tell them to go sit in a corner where it's even more isolated. And then you go, "Oh yeah, the kid's got ADHD." No, he just had a huge fucking sugar rush. That's why he's going to be sleeping in the next 30 minutes. I mean,
Yeah, no, but that goes right back to like what I was saying is I think certain traits of ADHD are actually, I mean, all ADHD really does is like put a lot of natural traits on level 10.
mm-hmm.
To me that's like what that does, right? When you do certain things, like the kid's not worn out. Like my son's autistic, right? Man, if I let that kid out in the backyard all afternoon, when he comes in, he'll play that video game. He'll be chill. He won't be all over the place. But if it's been raining out and it's storming really bad and he's cooped up all day, he's bouncing off of walls, man. He's just bouncing, 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 bouncing. So, it's just, it goes back to, like, yeah, I mean, you cut certain things out, it helps, but there's got to be more to it than just that. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that, but to be fair to RFK, he does talk about that. They just don't highlight it.
Right.
We
Yeah.
because that has been something that he has talked a lot about, if not almost just as much about as he has these items.
Right.
But that's not the hot button political topic as, let's tie
Yep.
physical activity to this, or, they're like, ooh, he's banning snack foods, but he's also putting money towards getting more fresh food in those areas where people use EBT, but they don't talk about that part of the program. They'll go, well, he's cutting money from this fresh food program. Yeah, but what he's doing is he's taking that money and he's
Mm-hmm.
putting it in food areas, or fresh food program in the areas where they would normally only be buying, unhealthy foods. So,
Right.
that's kind of like more of like the broad scope of what he's taking.
Mm-hmm.
I just wish that they covered it to a point so people could understand it. So it didn't just, but it's not as, it doesn't generate as much clickbait if you don't go, ooh, booga, booga, bad guy.
One of the things that I think was very powerful, and I can't remember if it was last, no, it wasn't last year. It might have been, I think it was 2 years ago. Uh, I think it had been before he had announced his candidacy that he was running, and certainly well before he dropped out. Um, he was, I think he was in California or something like that, and he was working out. And it wasn't just the fact that, like he took his shirt off and was like, look, I'm, however old, he's 60 years old, and, I'm in, really good shape or whatever. But like, that was very powerful because you don't see politicians, you don't see guys in suits really doing that. And it's like, I think that, because I remember, what was it? Michelle Obama, like her thing was, fighting childhood obesity. And then I remember the running joke for the longest time was, once Pokemon Go came out, it did more for childhood obesity than, all the programs
I
that
mean, it
Michelle
really
Obama
did.
came out did. And it's like, so I think if you have, and not to keep it too political, but like when they showed like the defense secretary, Pete Hegseth, right? When he was working out with the military, and like seeing that, and then you see RFK, and I think if they do more with like him and Tulsi, and they're out exercising and showing that and promoting that, the whole idea of exercising and being physically active, that's like, those things are going to speak volumes, because you're not going to see Donald Trump on a basketball court. You're not going to see whoever is a president in 2028. Like, you're not going to see those guys out there doing that, or those
Vivek
girls doing
Vivek Ramaswamy.
that.
Vivek Ramaswamy.
Right. You might see him on a basketball court, but that's also because he's half the age of these people.
Hey,
And
I want to see that man in the White House.
it's just one of those things where I think he's going to be governor for Ohio. Um, but it's one of those things, like, those are, I don't want to say they're necessarily polarizing, but those, like, there's depth to it. And when you combine the idea, like him and some of these politicians, like working out, and you're actually seeing him working out, and then you can attach that and being physically active to, hey, I want to eat this. And it's like, it wasn't like when I think he did an interview with Sean Hannity. and they went to Steak and Ale or Steak and Shake or whatever because they're doing like beef tallow fries or
Yeah.
whatever. But maybe you shouldn't have done the fries. Like maybe you should have just like maybe you should have gone somewhere and cool rah rah on the beef tallow, but whatever. Like it's maybe you shouldn't have done the burger and fries. Not saying burgers are bad for you, but it's like we see you working out, and I know you're not going to be able to do a ton of it while you're out parading around, but you're doing that, and then you're eating some type of whole food, minimally processed, like that's and then you come out and say, hey, you know what? In addition to, yeah, we're coming for dyes. Why are we going after dyes? Don't say, oh, because it causes. Yeah, we're coming after dyes because those are attached to all these artificially, all the artificially flavored, foods that are out there, and it makes it seem more appealing for your kids. And those are very calorically dense. There's no nutrition to it, and then like really, really building that message. And I think you're going to get a much larger audience, and then you can, and then again when you're attaching it to hey, these vaccines, and we're looking at the autism, and we're looking at a lot of these things. So when you start to pair everything together, like it seems like a legitimate message rather than unfortunately what has been pinned in the media as, oh, he getting rid of everyone, no one's getting Medicaid. And maybe he works with, if the Department of Education is still around, maybe he works with them and their funding is for more fruits and vegetables and less, pizza and whatever else.
Oh
Maybe
yeah.
that's what they go. Cool, I'm all for that. No problem with that. Support it. And I'm certainly not against anything that RFK is doing. Like I said, I just my whole stance was I feel like he's missing the mark, and that's not to say that they can't course correct, but when you really start to pair everything together, it goes, man, like that, yeah, that's a guy. He's working out. He's not eating French fries in an interview. Like he's stopping at insert any place. But he's eating like the grilled chicken and he's eating the vegetables and things like that. Like if you want people to stay away from certain foods, it's kind of like like vegan mac and cheese. Well, it's still mac and cheese. I'm not saying I don't like mac and cheese, but like mac and cheese is good, but it's not necessarily good for you. And if you go, oh, well, it's
Right.
plant based or oh, it's vegan or whatever, like, well, again, you're kind of if you want something to be plant based, why aren't you eating it? Salad, fruits, vegetables, things like that. And so I I have faith that that again they'll course correct and it'll be something that turns into something better than what it seems to be now. And I'm just very very hopeful because I don't like when I go for my yearly checkup. You see so many people can't walk in. Like when my wife moved here from Canada, she's like, people are not good. And it's not to say that everyone was like in super great health over in Canada, but it's like, man, things are definitely different. And so I'm
Yeah.
hoping that like I want to see people's kids be able to play with their kids. I want to see, you know, people not dying at 40, you
That would
know.
be nice.
So
Well, man, this is definitely great, and I think it's going to generate a lot of interest. It was great to have you on, and I got that. I was talking with the young lady about the toxic masculinity podcast. If you decide you want to jump in on that, I'll
yeah,
shoot you the info when we end up figuring out when we're going to do it.
yeah, 100%.
She's smart, real smart, really, really smart lady. I mean, I actually worked with her for a while. Then she kind of went off and did her thing, and man, she's just extremely smart, extremely reasonable person. She's not one of those like, she's not one of those. She even we were talking a little bit today, and she's like, we were talking about like feminism. Men have been left behind. She acknowledges that, right? That's huge.
Yeah,
A lot of that's just
especially in
not
today's culture. Yeah.
right. So like that kind of thing. It's like, okay, now we can have somebody in this. That's the field she kind of works in.
Mhm.
So it's like, all right, we have somebody that's got like some, what I mean, like
Right.
bringing that, merging the two things
Yeah.
together, and just kind of acknowledging it. And
Yeah.
she's just a great person. She's married, 2 kids. It's just, you would just be surprised. Like, obviously, you're a guy, so you get it to a point. Like some of the things we were taught normal growing up were told are toxic masculinity now, you know, and we kind of
Yep.
look at it and we like roll our eyes, but I think it's more of, I'm trying to find the right way to put it before we leave here. Like gender roles change depending on the situation, and I think it needs to be more than, needs to be more treated as, oh, okay, rather than, well, mom's the head of the household.
Right.
Well, sometimes mom is the head of the household. You know what I mean? What if mom
Mhm.
is like a really smart motherfucker and dad's a ding dong, but he's a really good guy and takes care of the kids and
Right.
makes okay money?
I
That's
think it.
okay. It is
Yeah.
okay.
It's
And
it's the idea behind, like, it's just like there's no actual definition behind like toxic masculinity. It's just you're either a toxic person or you're not. Because there's toxic
right,
femininity,
yes.
there's toxic masculinity, and I mean that is definitely, yeah, that's something
She
I'd
called
love.
it.
I'd love to.
I think she called it feminism. You know, I have not heard that term in so long. You know, but
Yeah.
you know, and I think that that's important. You know, like, you know, my 15-year-old man. Let me tell you, you know, just some things like I learned with that, and who, buddy, let me tell you, it is definitely an eye opener. And I sit there and I go, holy shit,
Yep.
could not have ever pictured that. But you know, so you know, this you know, it was good
Yeah.
jumping on with you, man. You
Absolutely. I
know, this will be
appreciate you
out.
having me on, and
No problem. This
yeah.
will be out in a couple. You know,